we are very proud to say that Gary is an alumnus of the George Mason University. Gary serves on our Dean's Council, and his firm, PwC, is our partner on today's symposium. Please join me in welcoming the moderator of the Securing the Cloud panel, Mr. Gary Loveland.
Thank you. Thanks, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to actually start with a little plug. As you mentioned, as alumnus of Mason and a member of the Dean's Council, it's great to see everybody here to support this symposium, but more importantly, to see the master's degree come out in secure information systems. As the Dean mentioned, I also had the pleasure of leading the PricewaterhouseCoopers security consulting practice. And over my 20 years at PwC, one of the things I've consistently tracked and looked at is the folks that are coming out of college and the amount of security skills they bring with them. Historically, what we've seen is there's a lot of focus on management systems, information systems, computer science, but it's just recently a focus where you start seeing information security. If you back up and look at all the conversations I'm sure everybody was just having out there during the break and the prior presentations, clearly there's a big major uptick in information security, and as a result, I think we're all in need of having additional skilled resources that are going to help us deal with not only the issues, but quite frankly, the opportunities when it comes to security. I know some of the questions that came out earlier, and I think a lot of times when we have these conversations, we talk about the bad side of security, keeping the bad guys out, all the bad things that can go wrong, which in fact is true. But I think in my world, in my practice, and dealing with a lot of clients out there, there's also a good part of security, making sure that the right people get the right access, can do the right things when they need to. And so when we look at the overall security equation, we see equal amounts of desire on both sides of that. So, I think when we look at what's coming out from the degree programs, what Mason is launching with the master's degree in secure information systems, I hope, there's skills on both sides of that. Yes, there's a major need to keep the bad guys out, but there's also an equal need to make sure that we as users of these systems, have the right access, can do the right things, and quite frankly, being an instant gratification kind of guy, I get what I want when I want it type of thing. With that, I'd like to quickly introduce my panel. I'm going to turn it over to them. Unfortunately, we had one quick change, and so I'm just going to go down the row here and have the panels give you a quick view on who they are, where they work, and maybe just a quick summary of their insights or background when it comes to cloud security. Dave, can we start with you?
Hello, I'm David Etchu. I'm a manager in PwC's federal practice focused on information security. I have had the opportunity to work with both cloud service providers as well as CISOs on their cloud security strategies and implementations in their businesses.
Hi, I'm Rendle Dickson. I'm a managing director in our Washington federal practice. I also work with both federal and commercial clients as it relates to information security, and certainly have seen an increase in the demand for our services as it relates to cloud security.
Hi, this is Vijay Kumar. I'm the odd man out. I'm not with PwC. I'm with ExoStar. ExoStar is a private company owned by 5 large defense companies: BAE Systems, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Company, and Rolls-Royce. ExoStar today delivers cloud services. I guess that's why they invited me to join the panel. I'll share with you some of the experiences we have in the aerospace defense sector.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the panel members joining us today. And I just say from the audience perspective, I do have a series of pre-canned questions I'm going to throw to the panelists here. But as you're listening to that, think about questions as we get toward the end. Or quite frankly, if you have follow-up questions that you would like to ask during this thing, I have no problem taking questions, because I don't have to answer the questions, the panelists do, so feel free to throw out your key questions there. When I look at cloud security, I go around, in my role, I get the opportunity to go to a lot of events like this, number of conferences, deal with all the analysts like the Forresters, Gartners of the world, things like that. And clearly, from a security practitioner perspective, cloud is one of the hot topics of the year. I haven't been to any event in the last probably 2 years where cloud hasn't been debated, and we continue to see it take a more and more of a forefront type of approach with our clients. When I look at that, I think a couple things that come up just as sort of introductory comments. From one perspective, it's always fun to get into debates on how much of this is really new. From one perspective, if you look at the definitions of cloud, haven't we sort of been doing this with delegated or distributed data centers, virtualization, things like that? You can have nice debates when we're talking about this, and maybe you hit the panelists when you're talking about your answers. Maybe the answers differ when you're talking about public clouds versus private clouds and things like that. But long story short, what we've seen from a security practitioner perspective is any time the technology world changes, security issues come up. Just think about your careers, last 20, 25 years, whether it's going back to the mainframe days, client server, LANs, internet computing, now cloud. Quite frankly, what I've seen is the same issues come up all the time. We're still talking about protecting our data, who has access to what, how do we protect it from getting the bad guys getting in. So security issues tend to stay the same. What tends to change is A, the technology we're using, and B, the solutions that are developed to then provide those security controls around the new technology. So from that one perspective, it's the same story, different day. From another perspective, because it is new technology, there are some unique challenges. So let's start with what I call more of a high-level question. The first is, what impact has cloud computing had on your company's information security? What incidences, events have you concerned when it comes to cloud security? Vijay, how about we start with you?
Thanks, Steve. I'll relate from ExoStar perspective, in the sense we are a service provider. The primary use case we address in aerospace defense is supply chain collaboration. When you think of these large companies, Lockheed, Boeing, they don't build everything themselves. They depend on a huge supply chain to build it, to support that product they build, and this product they build actually typically lasts about 50 to 60 years. The challenges they face, primarily, we heard about cybersecurity challenges in the supply chain. More and more, these companies are noticing that the cyber threat is coming through the supply chain to these companies. Nobody attacks Lockheed or Boeing directly because they're pretty well protected. They're attacking through their supply chain. So a lot of emphasis by these companies are being spent on how do we improve the security of the supply chain such that the entire security of the community improves. So in that sense, some of the paradigms we're seeing is, one, companies which typically compete are coming together to create what I'm calling community clouds, not public clouds, not private clouds, but community clouds, where they have a set of common operating rules which improve security per se for the community. Because at the end of the day, the suppliers are common in our community, whether it's for Lockheed or Boeing. The typical challenges that we're seeing today primarily deal with two areas. One is in the area of collaboration. By collaboration, I mean tools like email, instant messaging, SharePoint, tools that people use to collaborate. And these are tools that are easy to move it in the cloud arena, especially using technologies like software as a service. And in some cases, we are seeing that cloud has actually helped. If you look at email, email has been there in the cloud for a long time. How many of you have Hotmail or Yahoo accounts? Is that a cloud service? I would argue that's a cloud service that we're all familiar with. We didn't call it a cloud 10 or 15 years ago when we started the service. But email in the cloud is one of the very highly secure services that we're providing today. Whether we are providing directly in ExoStar or some other companies like Microsoft and others are providing. We are noticing that email is actually effectively helping reduce the number of incidents when it comes to implementing cloud security. The other area is identity management. Essentially, when you start looking at cloud services, we focus on two different use cases. One is you have applications which are what I call multi-tenant applications, where you have different customers using a single application. You also have applications which are specific to the customer. And depending on the type of the application, identity management plays a big role. And I'll explain that later on, give a chance to my colleagues to talk about what their experience is.
Great. How about Rendle, from your perspective? I know you work with a lot of government clients.
Sure. Our esteemed speaker, Fareed Zakaria, said that the fact that we are very connected makes us vulnerable. So similarly, government clients, to me, what I've seen is that they're intrigued by the prospect of the cost savings that cloud computing can provide, but they're not sure yet that cloud computing is a secure way of doing business. As government agencies begin to consolidate data centers, look for innovative ways to save money, and to provide anywhere access to email, calendaring, and documents, as well as solutions for some of their mission systems, cloud computing cannot be overlooked. However, security, as it evolves, is of concern to them.
Great. I know, Dave, you recently joined PwC from our acquisition with PRTM and had some prior experience. What have you seen with clients when it came to cloud security?
So I think what's interesting is I think Dave Berg this morning talked about the optimist bias, which so I'll probably be a little bit of a different. I'm very optimistic about cloud for a couple of reasons, and as I've worked with folks on it, there's some things that stand out. One is it's brought great attention to the security problem. That as the panel mentioned, it is so economically compelling that when you can take 70% of the cost out of running a set of IT infrastructure, that the answer cannot be no, we can't do it because it's not secure. That the CISO, when they say no, gets run over in that situation. And so the conversation is shifted to a yes, but here's how. And so the CISO's office has gotten a lot more attention because of cloud. The other thing that I think is a big deal is that in many cases it's a chance to start over. That we are for years in IT security paying for the sins of the past 20 to 40, 30 years of computing, and we have code that's been out there much longer than we ever expected. With adversaries we never predicted, and so it's a chance to start over. And when you look at folks that are taking the chance to do it correctly, I think there's some big pluses to it. The concerns that they've seen is one is from a cloud in a lot of ways has become synonymous with outsourcing again, which is true for more the public and community cloud, but less so on the private cloud. But what we've seen is there's definitely a decreased level of visibility and control of the infrastructure, that you're handing that over and understanding what's happening there and getting reports and knowledge back to bring into your operations is much more challenging. The security tools originally weren't there to measure what was happening at the hypervisor level, and so there was some increased attack surface that we couldn't monitor. Fortunately, a lot of that's changing. But the scarier thing that we've seen is, with the price points have come down, and anyone can go buy it. I mean, last night I was, looking at my personal backup strategy, for my home computer, and I'm like, hey, I could just go into Amazon S3, provision a terabyte of storage, put an application on top of it, with a credit card. And so anyone with a personal credit card, there's been many stories, great stories, particularly in the financial services industry, where people have gone out and built applications without involving the IT department, and that's very scary from an information security perspective, because we may have, business IP or sensitive regulated data going out places beyond the control. So that ease of purchasing is both a pleasant from an IT perspective, but challenging when it's done outside of the IT department.
Yeah, Dave, I think you raised a classic conundrum from a security perspective is we've had this history of saying, no, you can't do this, you can't jump in this new technology because it's not secure. And again, it's a dichotomy. From one perspective, I've seen a lot of my clients get in trouble with the CSO type person because they're seen as the people who always say no, raise that brick wall. So I think that we are trying to work with clients on raising that. You need to say, how can you do this securely? But at the same time, I'm definitely seeing that trend where, as I mentioned earlier, you're jumping a lot to different technologies. This is really the first time I'm seeing not security people, but really business practitioners step back and say, well, maybe we don't want to jump as fast to cloud because I've heard all this security issues out there. With that, we talked about, Dave presented earlier the Global Information Security Survey, and in that we saw, I guess, a little bit of a different answer. What we saw in that was like 4 out of 10 respondents reported their organizations are using cloud computing. That may be software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. When we asked those same individuals about what they thought, as cloud security improved, the responses were about half said yes, about 23% said it's actually weakened, and about 18% has said they've seen no change in the level of cloud security. So I guess the question to the panelists, what are you seeing from your clients in your industry? Are you seeing it get better? Are you seeing it get worse? And what are the issues that are coming up as far as what risks people are really focused on when it comes to cloud security?
Okay. I tend to agree with the survey. I think security will improve with the cloud. In one sense, at the same time, the security person in me says cloud creates a challenge. We all think of the single point of failure. The cloud paradigm is actually, to get you the economies of scale, is aggregating a lot of services to deliver the economies of scale. So that is a single point of failure scenario that the security, the CISOs have to worry. But in general, the cloud service also brings in not only economies of scale, but it also brings the best practices to take place in one at a service provider who's providing the cloud services. There may be best practices in security, there may be best practices in information sharing, there may be best practices in delivering services to specific SLAs. So what you're seeing is this specialization which is being provided by the cloud services. Specialization in security definitely helps. I mentioned the email scenario. A lot of supply chain in aerospace defense industry are about 100 to 200 people. They do not have IT staff in those companies. Cloud services definitely helps those companies. Rather than using hotmail.com, if I go to a cloud service for Microsoft Office 365, it has got enterprise level security built into that email system. I do have spam, I do have anti-phishing, all that built into the system. That definitely improves the security of that particular service.
Great. Dave, how about you? Anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think is interesting is if you look at, we lived through, years of outsourcing trends, and security, when we went through originally outsourcing, was, everyone had to talk about it, but it wasn't the key point of conversation. When you look at what's happening in cloud, when you look at companies like, Harris, CSC, Terramark, now Verizon Business, their core differentiator listed on, their marketing collateral and their sales presentations is about security. And so I think that, it's definitely going to get better. Another place I guess a bit of a skeptic of the skeptics is IT systems by nature are complex, that, and we try to treat them like individual components. We go, okay, well, now we've added virtualization, there's a hypervisor, and we've now increased our attack surface, and we can't do that. And the reality is yes, we have increased our attack surface by adding a hypervisor, but if the system we're putting on top of it is a Microsoft operating system that's 2 years old, that we haven't kept our patches up, that we do poor identity and access management of who has access to, and we run an application on top of it that's never been code reviewed and isn't secure, the change in the attack surface from the hypervisor just isn't relevant in the risk equation. And so I think that cloud is forcing us to have some better risk management conversations than we've had before. And so will there be breaches and incidents because people don't treat cloud security properly? Absolutely. Are there problems where people can't, one of the big issues of public cloud that we see is access control, that there's a lot of applications that have in a very bad way expanded their attack surface, that they have a community of 50 people that use it, yet the entire global internet has access to the application, there are some meaningful security problems, but we need to understand the entire system, and I think, again, cloud's doing that in a positive fashion for a lot of folks.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Rendle, what are you seeing from your clients on that?
So what I see is that there needs to be greater education. I think that a lot of things we've been talking about today and what we're talking about on this panel, for many of my clients, some of the people who are responsible for security haven't gotten the level of education and training that they need to be able to respond to some of the sophisticated attacks that we've been talking about. But that doesn't just pertain to cloud security. That pertains to security overall. But when you overlay it with the new technology, I think that it's a challenge for companies to do the kind of security awareness and training that is necessary for those folks who own the controls, who own security, to be able to really combat some of the issues that we discussed. So from my perspective and what I see at my clients, it's about education, about training and developing folks who are ultimately responsible for securing the cloud.
Well, that's good. You must be reading ahead because you jumped to my next question. So we're definitely seeing that. As I mentioned, as you see these technology trends going to new worlds and moving, things like training, education comes up, and guess what? PwC being an audit firm and the world of compliance is out there. That's one of the things that we didn't talk about, and I think in the earlier presentations that we clearly see, in addition to all the cyber security and the issues that you read about in the paper, one of the other big drivers we're seeing when it comes to security across any technology right now is all the issues around compliance. So most of you have probably spent the last 4 or 5 years dealing with fun things like, Sarbanes-Oxley or the government equivalents thereof, PCI, HIPAA, whatever, FISMA, right? You love that one. Talking about those different compliance issues. And so now we're adding a new technology layer. The other lesson that we've learned is the old technology never goes away. So most of us, why we got all these servers out there, we're jumping on cloud systems, we still have all the mainframes and everything behind there. So we're dealing with that expanded activities. So when you look at that, and maybe Rendle, I'll go back to you, but if you drill down on things like training, education, and on the other side, the IT auditing, as you move to cloud, what type of key activities you're seeing, what clients should be doing?
A lot of the agencies that I work with are really looking to the service level agreements and regulations to kind of guide them through, the federal regulations. You mentioned FISMA. The problem is, however, the regulations and the underlying guidance, such as NIST, have not kept up with the market. So they're going out, they're wanting to secure cloud services, they're wanting to buy these and engage these providers, and the authoritative guidance is behind. So then there's the quagmire of, okay, so what do I do now? Do I use the old FISMA to kind of look at a cloud environment? Does it really match? Even if I bring my auditors in, are they going to be able to effectively review the risks that I have in place? And so to me, it's like going back to the basics. We're talking about risk assessments, we're talking about encryption, we're talking about due diligence, and making sure that some of the basic things that you have always thought about, including where your data resides and data mapping and ensuring that you know where your data is at all times, has become critically important. And those are the kinds of activities that I'm seeing my clients undertake.
Vijay, how about for you?
Yeah, I agree. One of the challenges I would suggest to the audience today, cloud is slightly different than outsourcing in the sense, in outsourcing, the people who outsourced still felt they had control. They controlled the contractor, they controlled the services, they defined SLAs. In a private cloud, one could argue that concept exists. But when you talk about a community cloud or a public cloud, the concept of control goes away. What do you really control? Are you controlling your data? It's sitting somewhere. You don't know where the data is. Specifically, when you talk about regulations in some of the highly regulated industry like defense, people want to know where the data is because you come up with things like export control, right? To deal with export control, I need to know where my data is. And if in the cloud, I'm putting stuff in the cloud, I don't know where the data is. That's the first problem we run into cloud services. The second issue we definitely notice is regulations haven't kept up. When we talk about compliance, compliance still talks about in the paper world, to some extent in the electronic world, but the cloud introduces new technologies, new way of doing business. And if the compliance rules haven't kept up, it's a risk for the IT, the CIO of the company to interpret that regulation and make sure that the cloud service does not keep him in danger of being non-compliant. The third challenge that I notice is, Renee mentioned auditors. They're not good auditors we can go around, count on your fingers if you wish, who can actually go and audit and say, this is a cloud service which meets the requirements. Just like in the financial industry, you have a financial audit opinion, which you can look at and say, yes, this does meet. There is no such thing in the security world. We can't really measure anything and say, yes, there's a security opinion, which we can write in an annual statement saying, yes, our IT security, whether it's cloud or non-cloud, meets those requirements. So that's a huge challenge. Compliance, which is regulators, auditors who are not necessarily educated, and lastly, the lack of control that cloud brings.
David, anything to add there?
Yeah, first, I think the compliance conversation is spot on. That as we've worked with folks, that the conversation around, hey, the PCI Council, until earlier this year didn't have guidance on virtualization, and there was you could have interpretation that said if you use cloud services for cardholder data, that you were non-compliant, even if you had done the right risk management controls. And smart companies engage with their QSAs and figured out what the right compensating controls were and how to protect the information. A lot of companies ran scared and said, I'm going to wait until the guidance is further apart. Audit rights. So one of my personal biggest concerns of cloud is really around the visibility and discovery as to what's happening in your environment. The way these providers get the economies of scales that they do and the cost savings that they pass on to the customer is by having a single environment that they manage the way they want to, and that you don't have 85 auditors show up every day to look at something. And so a lot of the cloud providers won't even provide you audit rights as part of their standard agreements, which is challenging for almost every regulated business. But it also goes beyond audit and the visibility and control. Is that if you're in an industry that's dealing with I'm not a huge fan of the term APT. But if you're dealing with talented and persistent adversaries that are looking at at core intellectual property or military, political, economic espionage, that those attackers don't download Metasploit and run one attack and move on. That they're very sophisticated, very persistent. The term slow and low is thrown around a lot, and the top companies and government agencies that are great at detecting and mitigating those risks do it by correlating data across a wide number of systems. And I think the biggest area of challenge right now in the cloud outsourcing space is in the public cloud space is getting the right information into your system so you can detect those anomalies and behaviors that would be characteristic of something going wrong in your environment, as well as if something goes wrong, the forensics afterwards. I think that's probably the biggest area of risk that is yet unmitigated, is how you can understand what's going on in the environment in a fashion that lets you run your program while let the provider get the economies of scale they need.
Great. The risk of going slightly off a script here, each of you mentioned the issue around where is my data, understanding where my data is. I'll tell you again, in my world, we get engaged by clients all the time to help evaluate security, and one thing we're looking at is where is that data? And I would, I guess, sort of throw out there what we've generally seen, cloud or not cloud, is most clients really don't fully understand where their data is. Yeah. We're talking about the rules and regulations. Maybe there's different policies, government regulations based on where data is really located, but really having a good handle on understanding where my data is flowing as it goes in and out of the cloud. So just, again, looking for your insights, Dave. I'll start with you. Generally, do we have an understanding of where our data really is?
No, I mean, actually, I would say we actually don't have an understanding of if only 4 to 10 companies saying they're losing the cloud, I'd say at least 5, if not 6, are lying. But I think it's important that, again, this is a cloud conversation, but it's also a broader information data security conversation that I steal something from Mark LaBelle of PwC. It said there's 5 key questions that any executive should be able to answer about data security, and it's what sensitive data do I have? What regulations, OSR regulations cover that information? Who is the business owner of that data? Where is the data located in my enterprise, and what controls do I have protecting it? And those are great questions to use as a conversation inside of do I move to private cloud, community cloud, public cloud? But it's also a great conversation for any data security project that, as we talk export control, that, just within a multinational company, just in your internal controls have to have particular export control for the U.S. as well as many other countries, sensitive information. So I think those really 5 key questions. If an executive can't answer that, a project doesn't have the right sponsorship to move forward.
Great. Rendle, what about you? Where is my data?
Yeah, I totally agree with what is being said. And one of the most interesting things that I see is that organizations are looking for solutions without understanding their requirements as it relates to their data. So they'll go out and they'll say, I want to get XYZ system, I want to have global email, I want to have consolidated data center. And then you say, well, what are your requirements really at the end of the day? Who can share data, who can't? Where is your personal data? They don't know. Yet they want to overlay those problems with a solution that's going to make it even worse. And so I'm seeing that as a huge problem, one that I think definitely needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think where is my data without cloud is very interesting. Everybody's using email. I can send you a file as an attachment with my email. So is my data with me or with you, right? They have a number of collaboration tools today which make it easy for us to share data. Nightmare for the security guys, but that makes it easy for us to share data. And in that world, we really don't know where the data is. It's foolish for us to imagine we know where our data is. We can think it's in a private cloud. We can think it's in a data center with all the guns and the guards and the dogs out there protecting it. But somebody's emailing the data. Somebody's copying on a USB stick and taking it out of the office. Do we know all those elements, which are standard security practices we need to have, whether it's in cloud or not in the cloud? I tend to agree that actually cloud helps us start focusing on those questions, because once people start talking about clouds, they refer to those questions that David just mentioned and say, hey, we need to start paying attention. We need to start looking at things both from a perimeter perspective, from a data perspective, from an enterprise perspective. Where is our data? Who is accessing the data? Do I really control the access to my data when it leaves my enterprise? What is my enterprise boundary? Does it go into the cloud? Does it stop at the firewall? I think these are all great questions. And I think every enterprise has to come to its own answers. There is no single standard answers I would suggest.
One of the things I'll add is that this is a place where your general counsel can be your best friend in the security office. Is that or your OGC office in federal that. If a regulator or law enforcement officer shows up at the door, asks for data, and the general counsel is unable to provide it, there is a serious problem, it's a great opportunity to form a bond and allegiance with with the legal function in your business, because they have a very strong vested interest in this problem, and that's a bond that, when working together, can really help enable great things to happen in the organization versus a adversarial wait. Law enforcement officer just showed up and you're telling me that that's on a cloud server somewhere that we're not even sure what country it's in and we don't know how we can get access to that data. It's a great place to be proactive and really make great business impact.
Yeah, I would agree. I think one of the things, reflecting on your comments there, is this a problem, cloud security, or is it an opportunity? And one of the things that I've historically seen, again, and you heard in some of the earlier presentations, one of the big problems with our current information security controls is they were put in reactively. Something bad happened, let's go fix it. As a result, when something new's happening, whether it's a new application going in or, quite frankly, a transition to cloud security, yeah, it's an opportunity to do it right the first time, but also an opportunity to start getting that buzz out there at the executive level of the things that you're going to do, specifically address this concerns or issues around cloud security, but also leverage that as sort of the tip of the spear to address the rest of your security across your entire enterprise. So again, a recommendation I've always seen there is, again, be that optimist, as you said, Dave, and bring that up so you can get that funding around security specifically to address it for the cloud, but then drive it back to all the problems that we all know that we have out there. A lot so far it's been about the cloud, but no conversation about the cloud wouldn't be any fun unless you got into the debate about public versus private cloud. And some of the answers change based on whether you're talking about, Vijay, you mentioned emails, things like that, they're in public cloud. At the same time, a lot of systems that we're using, they're cloud-based technology, but really is a private cloud. So again, let's go down the line here and talk about the differences that you're seeing from a client-based perspective when you're debating that internal private cloud versus that external public cloud. Dave, how about you?
Great. So, I guess it wouldn't be a conversation without this. That, one of the things that I have found really interesting is as I've gotten to work with some both wonderful as well as security programs with opportunities for improvement. That one of the things that there's a great book that I blank on the title, but Gene Kim, one of the founders of Tripwire, wrote about stable ops in IT, and the organizations that had the best information security programs had the best IT operations. And so there's a couple key questions here, much like the data security, is that if I don't know what I have and I don't know how it changes, does anything else we're doing in security really matter? Or is everything else a house of sand? And so this is where the gets really interesting in the public-private cloud conversation. That when you look at, look at someone, like an Amazon, their operational, structure, due diligence on changes, their 24/7 operations mentality is unparalleled in almost every enterprise. And so from a public cloud perspective, they just run things better than any of us ever could hope to in our internal IT departments because they have the resource and the money to do it at the scale. However, on the opposite side of that, they bring an attack surface and lack of visibility to what's happening operationally that may offset that. And that's really where the conversation becomes important from the organization, what you're putting out there, what threats are to that data, and making that trade-off that, I rarely see a private cloud that is run as well as from a 24/7, both security as well as IT operation perspective as the private clouds. The private cloud has obviously the great benefit of it's yours, it's internal, you control the attack surface and visibility much better. And so that trade-off is a very interesting conversation to have. And two companies in the same industry, in the same data type, can come out completely differently based on how their internal risk management programs value those things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the key conversation to have.
Yeah.
Rendle, what do you hear in the whole public versus private debate?
Yeah, so again, I hate to keep going back to it, but again, it's about education. I'm learning things here today, and I know that many of my clients, when they think about a private cloud, they get this false sense of security, maybe not, about what it really means. And when they think public, they say bad. That's not good. So again, I think it's really important for cloud providers to continue to do the education that they're doing around their security posture and how they can help their clients to secure their data better. But at the same time, for clients who believe that the private cloud is the best solution, they need to also understand the risks associated with that. So I think it's really a balancing act, and at the end of the day, it always comes down to education and risk tolerance.
A follow-up to that, Rendle, before I go to Vijay. So yeah, I think that's good, but clearly what we see out there in the market, again, my history is getting budget to address security issues predominantly has been driven by FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yes.
The more I can throw all these issues out there, that's where I'm going to get the money for. Does that come up in play when you have that conversation?
Well, it does, and I've had some of my clients say, I don't want my leader to know about that because that's going to mess with my funding. I don't want to necessarily educate folks because that's going to mess with my funding. And so, yeah, I know that there's a game that's being played often, but again, the opportunity is that with the cloud, as you mentioned, business leaders are becoming engaged. They're reading about it, they're hearing about it, they want to know more about it. They're going out and doing research on their own, attending seminars like this. And so I think that the education that's coming about is going to do something with the budgets. I don't know if it's going to be good, I don't know if it's going to be bad, but I think it will have an impact eventually. And what I'm hopeful, based on our survey, is that we'll raise awareness and put money where it needs to be to protect this data.
Great. And Vijay, I got to believe in your world you have some nice debates on internal and external, public versus private clouds. Where are you coming out there?
Yeah, I think before I go into public and private, one of the key challenges that I see, obviously public and private do have, they have their uses depending on how they're used. So one of the challenges that we see in our industry is the industry participants are trying to grapple with this concept of information classification. There is low-risk information, there's high-risk information, there is medium-risk information. How do we classify this such that not everything is protected using the highest security levels? And that leads to the solution set. Solution set could be private, public, hybrid, like a community cloud, whatever the case may be. The challenge we're seeing is information classification seems like an easy concept, but in this world of information sharing, information classification means different things. I mean, for example, in the US federal government, I was told, there are 127 markings, what they call classified not classified, controlled but unclassified information. Every department has a different marking. And depending on the marking, every department has a different policy. For example, something which is classified as FOUO by a 3-letter agency may require for public dissemination encryption algorithms. the same information which is disseminated by a different agency does not require an encryption algorithm. So that brings up the question, do we really know what is the information we're trying to protect? Do we really know what are the controls we're trying to use? And more importantly, even if I mark the information, does the recipient of the information know how am I trying to protect it? Then that brings up the issue of, can I put this information in a public cloud or a private cloud? But unless we grapple with these concepts of information classification, I think public and private is the second order that we need to address.
I think the other fun discussion that always seems to come up when you talk about cloud services and specific cloud security is, is this really new? So one of the examples that always gets highlighted is basically infrastructure as a service. I'm able to spin up new disk drives, servers, et cetera, very quickly. At the same time, that conversation usually goes into, well, quite frankly, that's what we've been doing with hosted data centers for years, so what's new? So Vijay, I go back to you. From your perspective, if you look at infrastructure as a service from a cloud perspective versus the, quote, old world of hosted data centers, you see a difference there? If so, what is it?
I think that the difference is when we're managing hosted data center, we tend not to ask a lot of questions because there are a lot of assumptions that people make, the CIOs and the CISOs. For example, I know the employment rules I have in place when I hire people who manage my data center. Do I know the employment rules that my cloud provider actually has in place? I know if there's a breach, how to get the information to perform forensics. Do I know, can I get the data when I host it in this data center, which is not controlled by me? I would suggest the questions that we don't ask will lead to issues, whether it's a hosted data center versus a infrastructure as a service. And more what we're finding out is we're making so many assumptions as IT solution providers, we tend to forget some of the basic questions. And I think that is a challenge we have. Cloud is introducing a paradigm, but the questions remain the same. The challenge is, do we know the questions? Whether it's information classification, whether it's where is my data, or whether can I access my data when I need it, or who has access to the data, like Gary pointed out. If I put this information in Amazon.com, great, they have wonderful security, they have wonderful SLA, but can their administrator look at my data, which I consider my intellectual property? I know who can access the data, but I don't know which administrator can access the data. Questions we tend not to ask when it is a hosted data center. Questions we have to ask, I would submit, when it is an infrastructure service.
Okay. Rendle, I have to believe you have a number of clients that are in that hosted data center model. What are they thinking about as they compare that to cloud security?
Yeah, there's a really big push in the government to consolidate data centers. One of my clients just went from 22 data centers to 2 mega data centers. And to the point that you're making, the very same questions that he raised when you're looking at infrastructure as a service are the questions that they're not asking. And one of the main questions is, what is happening in that data center that changes my risk profile? And when are you letting me know about it, and what are you doing about it? And how are we going to work together collaboratively to understand what happened so that it can't happen again? So yes, there is a false sense of security. We've outsourced our security, if you will, and in my mind, you can never do that. And if you believe that you can, then we need to talk afterwards.
No details. Dave, how about you? You've helped some clients address this issue. What have you seen?
Okay, so I think their comments were great. So I'm going to take a little more technical answer to this question. First, what infrastructure as a service has often done is really created a change in our attack surface, and there are a couple reasons for that. One is, I think as Rendle mentioned, centralization. Cloud tends to happen as a if it's a private cloud as a data center centralization project, or it's going to a private cloud where there's lots of data. So either if it's internal, all of your data is now in one place, makes it more attractive from an attacker perspective, and obviously the public cloud providers have lots of interesting data. So there's that attack surface change that could be anywhere from the addition of the hypervisor. So for the non-technical folks, a hypervisor is the virtualization component. We used to install operating systems directly on hardware. The hypervisor sits between the hardware and the operating systems. So you could have one computer virtually running as many. That, to my comment earlier about if you have a poorly secured system on top of a virtualized infrastructure, that hypervisor may not really make a big difference. However, again, to the example of the 50-user application that you put on the public internet for everyone to access, it clearly does. So that from a negative perspective. But I think, you know, what I love to see is when CISOs and operations people get creative about the new resources handed to them. That that virtualization and cloud gives us opportunities to do things we couldn't do before. That, for example, you know, we can pause servers. So if we have a system that basically comes up and gathers data and reports once a month, why run that for 30 days a month? We used to run it for 30 days because we were scared to death of rebooting it and that it wasn't going to come back up. Now we can run the reports, we can hit pause, and we can take that server away for 29 days till it's needed again. And you know that's a massive reduction in attack surface as well as IT operations cost. That's a big deal. We also have the ability to do things like snapshot systems that in the event a system's compromised, if we have a snapshot, restoring used to be painful. We have to go get tapes and disks and run around like crazy and rebuild the thing. Now we can say, hey, this system's we think the system might be compromised. Let's just go back to what we had 2 hours ago in a snapshot, and then we're going to monitor it differently. And so there are some different security opportunities. I've even seen very, very, very leading edge customers that that with things like vMotion, where you can move an instance between different servers, even amongst different data centers, that if they see anomalous activity, they move an instance to a different data center, effectively changing, having to change the attacker's process. So, there's clearly, the attack surface problems are clearly, there's some on the bad side, but creative CISOs are finding ways to leverage this as a security positive also.
Great. So we've talked a lot about the concerns, the issues, the opportunities, but at the end of the day, we know folks are using this new technology. So again, looking for your insights when we talk about, maybe I'll break this question down to, again, a public versus private cloud conversation. But, given the data security issues that we're seeing, what are you really seeing as far as what are companies running on public clouds? What are companies using for private clouds? Or are they just staying away? I'm never going to put this application, this data on anything cloud related. Vijay, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll wear my service provider hat. I think, as David mentioned, depending on the information sensitivity, lower information sensitivity, people are moving it faster to the cloud to get the economies of scale. At the same time, they're noticing there is no such thing as with the advanced persistent that David mentioned, or the cyber attacks we see from very sophisticated actors with a lot of patience to get to the information they want to get to. The patterns have changed. The concept of lower information security, higher information security that we have in security world is changing. Once I get to that, David mentioned the concept of attack surface. Once I get to that particular application, and if that application happens to host different types of information, it doesn't matter if I'm accessing that application to access lower information using username, password, to access a higher level of information, I'm using a highly sophisticated PKI smart card. At the end of the day, attacker knows how to get to that application, and that is a challenge for us in the cloud world, to protect the information at the highest level of security, but offer you the price at the lowest level of classification. That's a challenge for us. The other challenge we see in the services world is everybody loves audits. So if you have 10 customers, every customer wants to audit us.
Thank you.
Is that true? So that's great for the customers. It's painful for us. We want to go through the same audits. There has to be, obviously SAS 70 is good at the data center level, but as we move up the stack, we need to not only have standardization on audits, but especially in the cloud world, standardization on how the relying parties, how the application owners or the information owners can accept a single audit rather than sending their armies of auditors to come and audit the service provider. That's a huge challenge for us from a service provider world. It's nice to say it's cloud, nice to say economies of scale, but every day if you have an auditor sitting in your office, you tend to lose that.
So could I just respond to
Sure,
that?
go right ahead.
So in the federal government, maybe you've heard of FedRAMP.
Yes.
And so, everybody is like, when is FedRAMP going to come out? because it's been touted as the solution to exactly what you just described for the federal government, but it also has a commercial application where you do the accreditation once, and then many can rely on it. I think that depending on politically who's in office or who's in a certain space, that conversation goes away. So in the absence of that, what you're going to have, to your point, is different customers believing that they're unique and they need customized security. And so to a provider, to be able to offer the economies of scale that you want to as a provider, it becomes very problematic. So I see that as a huge area of risk, challenge, opportunities, concerns in this space, and I think that it really has to be addressed. I don't know how it's going to be addressed. I don't know if we're ever going to come to a solution, but I know that many of the providers that I work with through my alliance with the federal government, they were looking to FedRAMP to really be the solution, and for some reason it's just out there now willy-nilly with nothing really coming to closure.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, I can't remember the name of the what it's called now under the Cloud Security Alliance, but there was a separate program called Cloud Audit.
Yes.
That CSA has taken over, and,
Yes.
and you know, the idea of having a standardized format that information can be published and shared potentially in near real time is a big deal and has the opportunity to flip how this works. I would encourage that there is a Wall Street CISO I had the chance to work with years ago who had, I can't remember the number of regulators that came to visit him, and he basically said, you come to visit me every quarter, give me your list of questions. And he ran a program to basically build an automated tool that's populated a database and an application with all the information they needed. And when the regulator showed up, he said, you can go to that machine and you can pull, log in, you can pull this report and all the data is there. And I think the cloud service providers will head in that direction. I think it's the CISO's responsibility, though, to tell them what data they need. That much like our internal IT operations, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of data. What to share, sharing it all is not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It's overwhelming. And so knowing what's really important, knowing what questions to ask, you can really coach. Whether your cloud provider is your internal IT organization or whether it's ExoStar, whether it's Amazon, that you can coach them on what information you see. It's a place where the customers can really have a big impact because it's really undefined today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, many of us are used in the hotel industry. We know there is a rating scheme, whether it's Michelin rating or Zagat rating, whatever. We know what the rating scheme typically means when you go to the restaurant or go to the hotel. We don't have that for cloud services. There is no rating scheme. There is no auditor who rates us and we can say, hey, this is a rating scheme. We are 3.5 on this scale of 1 to 5, or we are 2.3 on the scale of 1 to 6, whatever it is. We need that to have this cloud really take off, whether it's public cloud, private cloud, community cloud, hybrid cloud, whatever the case may be. If the hotel industry has done it, why can't the IT industry do the same in the security world?
So how about questions from the audience? I know a number out there are using cloud, or quite frankly, might be cloud providers that might have a rebuttal to some of the things that you heard, the opinions that were stated up here. So we have a few minutes. We want to get questions from the audience.
This one there.
Okay.
So Dave, this is really more of you. So how do we really prove what security is being provided by the cloud provider? So internally we do our security testing and evaluations and we store our data inside of it. How do we prove that these cloud providers are really doing security?
Yeah, it's
Can you
a
repeat the
great
question,
question.
Dave?
So the question is how do we prove that the cloud security providers are doing the security that they say do? Because internally we can do our own assessments. And I think actually is a great transition from the audit question, because having 80 customers red team the same infrastructure is probably counterproductive generally, as well as, we all know that penetration testing can often have, unforeseen operational consequences to it. And so and it's even unclear in some contracts whether you're allowed to do that or not. To me, this is about, this is the information sharing problem, is that, that the cloud providers are going to have to get to a point where they're willing to expose more about what security controls they have and share that information with a customer-centric view. And, I had the opportunity to actually have some interesting conversations with the cloud provider about how they might do this over the next 3 to 5 years. And it's a really interesting challenge because you need to understand what, you don't just have a server. It's not like, oh, that box is mine. You now share that box with other people. You share the network fabric with other people. You share the administration fabric. And so showing a view of that to the customer isn't easy, but it's going to have to happen. That, as Vijay said, most people are hopefully starting with the low-hanging fruit, the non-sensitive data that can be put out there. I think we will get to the point where we're going to be looking at things like, we're probably not going to have our main intelligence agencies putting their data on Amazon, but I think we will see some really, their core, top secret information. But I think we will see us get a lot closer to that, and that transparency is a big piece of it. And I have great hopes that things like Cloud Audit will provide a framework to say, hey, here are red team results. Here's how we reacted to patches that under NDA that there'll be some visibility coming, particularly from the differentiated providers like a Verizon Business, Terramark, CSC, Harris, Nexstar, those type folks.
Well, I think in addition to public clouds and audits, what we are lacking is the concept of governance. We talk about audits, we talk about security, but everything works under the concept of governance. I mean, Renee mentioned this FedRAMP. They're trying to define what is the governance model that has to be in place so we can accept the services at the right risk profile. And unless we have, it's very difficult to have a governance on a public cloud. And that's why we're seeing these concepts of community clouds, where people within the community who have common interests are trying to form a community governance structure where they can actually start looking at these services commonly. Try to get the benefits of the economies of scale, while at the same time get the assurance that their information is protected the way they want it to be protected. Without governance, in my mind, none of these services are really useful.
Great. We have time for one more question.
Sweet. I got it. My name is Paul Eldridge. I'm actually a current undergrad at George Mason.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Applied IT. So here's a question. We are studying this in some of our cloud computing classes right now. Don't tell my teachers I'm getting credit for this. So I've heard some talk from you guys about trying to standardize the process of this disparate security approach with centralized cloud service with different customers looking at the same thing. Is the process of attempting to standardize how you do that inherently dangerously coming towards a snake oil kind of thing where it's this fake prepackaged confidence that people are looking for this pat on the back? Attempting to standardize something that's inherently highly adaptive, very individualized, non-deterministic, is that a dangerous road to go down, trying to get used to this feel-good, can I just get the rubber stamp that this one's okay, please?
Renelle, you want to start with that one?
Whoa.
I may have made enemies by saying
Excellent
that.
question from a student. I love that.
Tell my teacher.
I have thought about standardizing security, and certainly that false sense of security and the standardization could cause the very problem that you're thinking about. Security is dynamic. Risks are dynamic. And so you can standardize to a certain point, I believe, taking cloud even out of the picture. But you always have to be responsive to the threats and the vulnerabilities that are new and that are emerging. And so you standardize at a baseline, yes, you secure that, but then you get ready for all the other things that are going to go wrong along the way. So when we talk about standardization, what I was really speaking of is really an accreditation path that cloud providers would go through that would kind of think of the topical areas that would be important. But your security is never stagnant. It's always moving. It's always changing. And so in order to really stay in front of that, you have to continually assess the risks and the threats. I agree, 100%.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. You cannot, you can trust somebody, but as I think President Reagan said, you want to audit them.
Just been verified. Yeah, actually, I'm just glad to hear there's cloud computing classes because there's some people I'd like to send. To me that this is about a homogeneous operating environment versus a heterogeneous one. We have, we were paying for the past 20, 30 years of sins in IT from a security perspective. This is an opportunity to build an infrastructure that a centralized, relatively similar infrastructure that we control and manage it, and that provides us an opportunity to run things better than we have before, to apply security controls in a different fashion. That we, you look at software as a service providers, they look at security that we've never had the capability to, because if you're Salesforce.com, and your entire job in life is providing a CRM that someone logs into via web service or web application, you can take security so high up that stack because you have a unified view underneath it that we just haven't had the opportunity to do before. So I think that that's what I see as the benefit. They're clearly, compliance by nature in the security world is a challenge because, our adversaries innovate every day. We look at, I think someone asked a question earlier about there's increased spending in security, but we're getting worse. Our adversaries, are getting better faster than we're getting better right now, and we've got to do something about that. And so, saying you're compliant means that you probably met the best practices of 3 years ago when our adversaries are changing daily. And so one of the biggest challenges and the biggest snake oil of the flood of the security industry in general is the yes, we're secure. It's really hard to measure a provider on whether or not, software company, consulting company, service provider, on whether or not they keep up with the threat and understand the threat actors and their motivations and challenges and bring that back into their operations. That's something really, really hard to measure. I don't think there'll ever be an audit for. So I think that's really where the more of the snake oil side of your question will unfortunately always exist.
Well, I think it's a great thing about security. There's never an easy answer. As I tell my wife every day, well, that's what keeps me employed. I do appreciate the George Mason University School of Management. I applaud them for their efforts in bringing this symposium together, and to the education comments, driving education around secure information systems. I do want to thank the panelists, so a round of applause for them. Dave, Rendle, and Vijay for your great insights. I know sometimes it's hard to get up here and talk about what you're doing and be the one to put it out there, so thank you very much. With that, Dean Haddock, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, panelists, again. The panelists will receive the memento on the mail, so you don't have to carry it with you. So thank you again. Let's give them another round of applause, please, to Gary and